You don't even know how excited I am, so how would you even know? All right, so today we're going to talk about Friday's material where we finished Paleobiology, and then we'll get into today's material where we started human evolution, right? From here, pretty much through the rest of Exam 4 material, it's just on human evolution, right? I would start now. The mistake that I see a lot of students make is thinking, I'll wait until he tells us all of the species, or until we talk about all the species, or I'll just wait till the exam's closer so that it stays fresh, right? You're going to have to know every pre-human species, when they lived, sometimes where they lived, if they have a famous example, and then if they use tools, and if they did, what kind of tools. You have to know that for I want to say 10 different species, right? And I see students make the mistake of saying, I'll memorize it a few days before the test so that it's fresh, right? It's a lot of stuff. And it's pretty, not vague, but it's kind of random, right? There's not really a great way to remember that Australopithecus was from 3 million years ago and Lucy was the famous, there's not really a good way to do that. So start now, right? Don't get comfortable, especially because exam 2 is in a week and a half. Exam 4, why did I say exam 2? It's in a week and a half, right? I think so. So it's going to come up very fast. Just start working on it now. That's essentially what this whole rant is about. So, paleobiology and then human evolution. Your biology fact for the day is that chimpanzees actually have their own voice that we can tell apart from other chimpanzees, called a pant-hoot. And the way that they make this noise is completely distinct from every other chimp, at least within their social group. So it almost functions as their name. You know what I mean? It's not that's what they call each other, but that sets each chimp apart from each other. So they actually do have an individual identity. And humans actually can even tell the difference between their calls. So humans, obviously you have to spend some time with them, but their caretakers and stuff like that can recognize each individual chimp, not just based on their physical traits, but on how they sound. So that was kind of wild. I'd never heard of that before. So the study tip goes along with what I was kind of already saying. Make a chart or a graph or some kind of something. This is what I did, and I didn't fill the whole thing out because I didn't want to take the time to fill the whole thing out. It's just to show you, right? So and you will put whatever boxes work best and make the most sense for you, right? But at least have those 5, right? And so you'll have to know, Australopithecus, 3 million years ago. I think there wasn't a location on him. He didn't have tools. The famous example is Lucy, right? Those are the key things to know about each species. And some of them will have, maybe a 6th category. You can maybe just put miscellaneous as a 6th box. Whatever works for you, right? But have it all on one sheet of paper. The reason this works so well is if it's on several pieces of paper, you have to kind of flip back and forth, and your brain sees them as separate images and separate topics almost. At least for me personally, I found when it's on the same sheet of paper, it's weird. I almost remember their order based on which one was above it and which one was below it. And so I made this chart, and then when I went and took the test, I could actually picture it in my head on one sheet of paper because I didn't have to flip back and forth. And I almost just cheat sheeted out of my brain. I had memorized this chart. And again, it was because I made it now, not 3 days before the test. So even though we haven't talked about all the pre-human species, it's in his PowerPoints, right? So go the extra mile a little bit on this one. Go into the PowerPoints, and they're all just right there. It's not going to take you hours. It's going to take you 10 minutes maybe. And just make your whole chart with all the species from his PowerPoints, all their key information. and then start memorizing it now. Because I promise you, there will be questions about that exact information right there. And if you've just glanced at it or looked at it for a couple days, or you remember a few but not all of them, almost always the one that gets asked is the one you don't remember, right? You're like, oh, I know everything about Australopithecus, and then he brings up some totally different one that you're like, oh, I didn't spend a lot of time on that one, right? So know them all, because none of these are like more important or more test question worthy, right? So know them all and start that now. Okay, anyway, that's my big log rant, because from here it's basically just memorization stuff. There's not a lot of concepts. You guys will pretty much come to these sessions from here until exam 4 for me to reiterate things, because hearing it more than once helps you memorize. And I'll give you some more tidbits and facts like this, right? But there won't be any like really big concepts that you have to like know the math behind or anything like that, right? So start just getting into memorization mode. Okay, that being said, let's get started. So before we even get into pre-humans, how did we even get to mammals at all? There are a few key transitional species that we talked about in class. So how it started was the synapsids, right? The therapsids became cynodonts. The cynodonts became mammals. Yeah?
So are like the therapsids, like to the mammals, are those all considered synapsids?
I believe therapsids are a type of synapsid, but I could be wrong on that. I don't think mammals are synapsids. I think it goes synapsids, but inside the synapsids is therapsids, to cynodonts, to mammals. Not 100% certain, so if anybody finds out differently, but pretty sure it's just that therapsids are a type of. So the classic examples that you need to know of are the Dimetrodon and the Thrinaxodon. I always have a hard time with that one. Just know that they're transitional species going from synapsid to mammal, right? So I don't know for sure, but I would guess he's probably a therapsid. I don't think you have to know that. And then Thrinaxodon followed as a cynodont, and then eventually we got to mammals. So know these three terms, right, and the order that it went: therapsid to cynodont to mammal. Make sense? Any questions? Okay. An interesting way that they're able to tell this is by skull shape, and that's actually where what am I trying to say? It's where the names come from, is based on their skull shape. So the synapsids, right, had this single hole behind the eye. The therapsids, if I remember right, had it on both sides. This isn't like test stuff. The number of holes isn't test stuff. The naming and things like that is. So the synapsids had that one hole. Therapsids, I want to say, had the two. Then the cynodonts, they still have the same one, but you can watch it flatten out and get a lot smaller. Then the later cynodonts, I believe it would be this area there. And then the very latest cynodonts, I can't even see one. I think they may not have one at all. And so they're able to watch skull shape change from synapsid. You can think of maybe just your standard dinosaur, right, into what became the mammalian skull shape. Obviously, not every single mammal has that skull shape. Most don't. But it's some variation of that, and they're able to trace that lineage. So test questions on something like this would probably be just along the lines of either knowing that the location and size of the temporal fenestra is how they were able to figure out the lineage from synapsid to mammals. And again, just that order, synapsid. So I guess I was wrong. It goes synapsid, then therapsid, then cynodont, then mammal. So therapsids weren't a type of synapsid. They were a type, or they were the species right after. Yeah, that's what I would know about this part. Make sense to you guys? Feeling okay with that? Okay. Again, this is all just about knowing the examples, right? Dr. Messina loves examples. So the famous transitional species you need to know, Morganucodon was the early mammalia form. So from what I understand, it wasn't technically considered a mammal because it's a transitional species, but its mammalia form in the sense of it looked a lot like a mammal. It just didn't quite have every single characteristic, right? Yeah, so I would just know Morganucodon was a transitional species for mammals about 205 million years ago. I don't know that we talked about Hadrocodium woo all that much. If you happen to know that name and date as well, it wouldn't hurt you. You wouldn't need to know that it weighs 2 grams or anything. I would be shocked if Dr. Messina asked that on a test. So, anything's fair game though, technically. So, don't come to me and be like, you said that he wouldn't ask if it was 2 grams. I said I would be shocked if he did. And it's recorded on video as proof. So when I get an email, I'm just going to reply with like these 30 seconds from this Panopt. I'll just send it to you. I told you that it could be on there. All right. Developmental biology is what it sounds like, right? It's the study of how living organisms develop from zygote to essentially all the way up to sexually mature organism. So it helps us understand how genetic change changes phenotype. So how genotype affects phenotype, right? One important thing is most animals look the same for the first few days, even up to weeks, right? If those weren't labeled chick and human, would you be able to tell me which one was which? Not a chance, right? They don't even really look like anything. But they both have a tail. They have gills, right? But neither chickens nor humans have gills when they're born, right? Except in like extremely rare cases. And just in general, they follow all the same body plan, right? This is just because all vertebrates came from the same ancestral species, right? So they all share the same building block, if you want to think about it like that, right? So something that was important in developmental biology was looking at bone structure, right? This helps identify different species and what kind of class and genus and family they can fall into can be based on bone structure. So these are definitely names you need to know. I remember a test question. I don't remember which of the 3 it asked me about, but I remember a test question essentially asking where one of those was located. I don't remember. So if it was like the autopod in humans is, the hand, or the zeugopod is the forearm, or the stylopod is the bicep area. Does this have a regular arm? Pre-arm? Arm? It's arm and forearm? 2-arm? Humerus? Yeah. And notice it says humerus and femur because this isn't exclusive to arms, right? In fact, most animals don't have arms per se, usually just multiple legs, right? So it also works for femurs, tibia, fibia, tarsals, metatarsals, right? So, and it's not just for humans, right? Dogs have a stylopod, a zeugopod, and an autopod, right? Any tetrapod, so any 4-legged creature has this bone structure, right? So just know stylopod, zeugopod, autopod, right? I don't really have any good like tricks for remembering this. I do always remember that autopod is the hand, because if you drive a car, your auto, which ironically it would be manual, you use your hand, right? So that's just how you drive your auto, if you're British, I guess, with your hand, right? Stylopod, zeugopod, yeah, I have no idea. Yeah.
Maybe like with the stylopod, you can think of like a stylus, and the stylus is just this little pen.
Oh yeah.
A single bone.
Right. Yeah. The one bone, right? Is your stylus.
You go with zeugopod, the Z kind of looks like a 2.
Oh yeah, you could say the zeugopod is like a Z right there. Look at that. You guys did great. And autopod is the car, which makes no sense. But in my head, I was like, that makes sense. You drive your car with your hand. So if that doesn't make any sense, you make up your own thing, right?
Pod, does it contain a lot of stuff in it?
A pod has a lot of stuff, a lot of like little bones, right? Or you hold your iPod in your hand, even though, oh, they all have pod. I ruined it. Plus, nobody uses iPods anymore. Do they even sell iPods anymore? You still have an iPod?
Yeah, I still have a Gen 2.
What the heck, man? Yeah, so come up with your own way of remembering that. Just make sure you know stylopod, zeugopod, autopod, where they are, and more or less like the structure. So if it said the autopod is also known as, like the hand, or the stylopod is also known as the arm, or the zeugopod is the forearm, or which bone maybe you could relate it to. So your stylopod would be your humerus, something like that, right? Make sense? Yeah? Okay. So now we get to start looking at how we got to the tetrapod limb as it is now, especially pentadactyly, so 5 fingers. Again, important transitional species. Whenever you see the name of a transitional species, you have to know it, right? So Tiktalik was the bridge between lobed-finned fishes and tetrapods, right? It's what took certain fishes from having just a fin with kind of one bone in it, I think that's how they were, into eventually what became arms and legs, right? Other important features to notice were flattened head and eyes and nostrils and a neck, right? Fish don't have flat heads with eyes and nostrils on top and a neck, right? That's what amphibians have. So this Tiktalik was going from fish to amphibian, and he was changing his physical shape, right? His limbs had a wrist. Fish don't have wrists, right? They just have a fin. Yeah?
What are tetrapods
Tetrapods?
then?
Four limbs, and I don't know if like exclusively they have to have 5 fingers, but they most of the time do. So tetrapod just means 4 legs.
I don't think they have to have 5 fingers because of horses.
Right, horses just have 1. So yeah, most of the time they're pentadactylous, but they don't have to be. It's just if it has 4 limbs with a stylopod, zeugopod, autopod is what makes it a tetrapod. So Tiktalik was not a tetrapod, right? He was just on his way to a tetrapod, right? So he like had a wrist, but he may not have had like the full stylopod, zeugopod, autopod, something like that. I'm not even sure. But just know Tiktalik, intermediate between fish and essentially amphibians. Sound good? Acanthostega is an interesting one because he had, I want to say 8 fingers. Yeah, 8. And Dr. Messina mentioned that when they found this fossil, they thought that 2 fossils had formed on top of each other because they were like, why does it have so many freaking fingers? But the more they dug them up and found them, they realized, no, these all just have 8 fingers. They don't really know if there was a specific reason why, but that's just how they looked, right? So you can even see it looks weird. It looks like a little alien hand. He's got just tons of fingers, right? They were, I don't know if they were a transition between fish to amphibian or if they were fully formed amphibian, but again, they're going from fish to amphibian. They may even be all the way there. So Acanthostega was just an interesting example because of not pentadactylous tetrapod limb. Sound good? All right. So a lot of development, well, I guess a lot of evolutionary change is just messing with, tweaking with development in utero, right? It's just speeding things up or slowing things down or changing a little bit of this or adding a little bit more of that, right? So a couple of important things to know. First off, heterochrony, important vocab term. It's just change in timing, right? Hetero means different, and then chrony means time. It's a change in the rate of development, right? And this can change characteristics on a full organism scale, right? So the example I found online was with a zebra. And I don't even know if this is a real example, but it gives you a visual, right? You take a zebra fetus, and if you get it to develop stripes right away, they're a lot thicker, right? They develop for longer, and he gets thicker stripes. Again, I don't know if this is actually something that happens. Or you take a zebra fetus, and you don't get him to develop stripes until pretty far along into the fetal stage, and the stripes are a lot thinner, right? And it's literally just that change in when things started developing. Everything else could be exactly the same. They could be exposed to the exact same hormones. They could even come from the same mother, right? They could even be siblings, right? But if one starts developing stripes later than the other, they'll look different, right? And this goes for everything. If you change development time, then you change a trait. And it can be huge, it can be brain size in humans, right? That basically is what set us apart from every other animal on the planet. Or it can be something as small as stripe thickness, but it's just that change in timing, heterochrony. Guys good with that? So then we have two more vocab words, pedomorphosis, paramorphasis. Anybody remember what pedomorphosis is?
Slowing down in development, so it's more juvenile, like pedos, child.
Yes. Pedo means child, so pediatrician, child doctor. Pedomorphosis is maintaining those juvenile, infantile, baby traits, right? Paramorphosis then is just the exact opposite, is putting on adult traits more quickly. So, some examples of pedomorphosis is this Mexican axolotl, cute little guy. He still has his external gills, right? This is not normal in salamanders, right? They usually internalize that so that when they climb out of the water, they don't suffocate, right? They have their internal gills, they can breathe water and air, right? Axolotl, on the other hand, stays in his juvenile state, but it's a permanent juvenile state, so you can't really call it a juvenile state because he never leaves it, but relative to other species in his family, he stays juvenile, right? They know that this is a juvenile stage because they inject them with thyroxine. It's just a hormone, and they will actually develop into an adult stage that doesn't exist in normal, natural axolotls. They can actually kind of force it to turn into an adult that it never would turn into. So it's kind of wild, right? They just take these guys, inject them, and they evolve like Pokemon, right? It's pretty sweet. So yeah, that's an important example of pedomorphosis that I would know, the axolotls and their permanent juvenile state. Then you have paramorphosis in humans, right? Is the fact that you maintain your fetal growth rate into adulthood. And that's why humans and a lot of primates have a really high brain to body size ratio. Our brains are much larger compared to our bodies than most animals, right? Especially like millions of years ago, Stegosaurus had like a peanut-sized brain, but they weighed hundreds of thousands of pounds, right? We're the opposite. Our brains shouldn't be as big as they are, but because of paramorphosis, we keep developing our brains as fast as we did, pretty close to as fast as we did when we were a fetus. Make sense? Everybody follow that one? But you also see pedomorphosis in apes. Sorry, in humans. So the paramorphosis is that the brain keeps growing at a fetal rate, but we're also pedomorphic because our skull doesn't change that much from the fetus. So you take a chimpanzee fetus and a human fetus, pretty darn close in skull shape, right? General skull structure. But a human adult doesn't change that much relative to its baby skull, right? You know, the jaw juts down a little bit, the skull pushes back a little, the front pushes up a little, but not much. You can see it with this, I don't know what that's called, plane, that shows you it only warps a little bit. But a chimpanzee fetus and a chimpanzee adult don't even look the same, right? The skull elongates, the brow pushes all the way up, and it pinches towards the back, and it completely changes skull shape. So that's why humans are considered pedomorphic for skull shape. Cool beans? Okay, one person acknowledged me. Good enough. This is the event thing, vocab term, that I find really cool. Atavisms. They call them throwbacks to the ancestral form, right? It's when you can watch an organism, and all those organisms, dolphins, all look the same, right? But then one random dolphin, for whatever reason, activated an ancient gene from when it had hind limbs, right? Because dolphins used to be land creatures, obviously not dolphins, but pre-dolphins used to be land creatures, kind of almost wolf-like, right? They had hind limbs. And for whatever reason, this dolphin happened to activate the gene that told it to grow hind limbs, and all of a sudden it had those rear fins. And these fishermen were like, what the heck? Like, dolphins don't have rear fins. Is it like a fish that like bit it and stuck to it? And they couldn't figure it out, and eventually they just realized this dolphin activated an ancestral gene.
So if that dolphin had children, would those children have a greater chance of having those hind?
I have no idea. I would guess no, because this is just a totally random event that out of nowhere it just turns on an ancient gene. But I don't know if this would affect later generations. That's a good question. Dr. Messina would know. So these are pseudo genes, right? They're still there in the genome. They have to be, otherwise it couldn't come out. But they don't do anything normally, right? So humans, we still have a gene to grow a tail, right? He showed us a picture of a doctor holding a baby, and it has a tail. It was probably like 6 inches long, right? We have that gene, we just never turn it on. We don't need it anymore, but we didn't get rid of it. But that baby, for whatever reason, and I don't know, and you don't need to know the underlying reasons behind it, activated that gene and grew a little tail. Those are atavisms. So, test question I would expect to see on something like this would be to be given maybe something like, which of the following is an example of an atavism? And you're given 4 or 5 options, and they all sound like atavisms, but they're not. Or be given 4 or 5 examples, and they're all atavisms except one, right? So it'd say like, which of the following is not an atavism? And you would have to know, okay, it has to be a throwback to an ancestral gene from a pseudogene, right? So it can't be like a pear tree is crossed with an apple tree and creates, like the ancestral form of an apple, right? Yeah, that wouldn't work, but, in a test question, you may have created an ancestral apple, but you didn't do it with an atavism, right? You did a crossbreed, so it's not an atavism. A mutation and an atavism are not the same thing either, right? What's the difference?
Mutation's random.
These are random as well.
Atavism,
It's ancestral. Mutations are.
Mutations are looking forward, right? A mutation happens to an organism and then consequently can continue to affect its offspring. I don't know if atavisms can keep going forward, but an atavism looks backward, and it has to work with something that was already there and is just asleep, right? So a dolphin's not going to grow fingers like human fingers. They're never going to grow thumbs and call that an atavism, right? Because they never had a thumb gene. So if a dolphin were to mutate and grow thumbs, not an atavism, a mutation, right?
So like if humans had gills, would that be an atavism still, or a mutation?
I don't know.
Because technically it's ancestral.
Yeah. I don't know.
or would it be a mutation if the atavism went from generation to generation, be considered it, not just a random event that happened?
Well, an atavism can't be a mutation because it's not a change in the genome. It's an activation of dormant genes. So nothing's changing. You just activated a gene that you don't normally activate. That's the difference. So I don't know with that specific example because I don't actually know if humans still have a gill gene. If it were specified in the question, humans used to have a gill gene, and now you see a human grow gills, then it's an atavism. Yeah, so if you were to get a question, it would be pretty clear whether or not it's ancestral or a mutation, and that's basically where I would draw the line, right? Decide whether it came, something already existed, went dormant, and then got reactivated, atavism. Or did we take a gene that was already normal and current in the genome and change it and make something new, right? So had dolphins never had a hind limb gene, this would be a mutation. But nothing changed in his genome, you just turned on a sleeping gene, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, I imagine there will be a practice test question on this. I would hope.
Is he going to give us a practice test before, or is he going to do the same thing as Bobek did? I'm going to give us the one.
What do you mean? Did Bobek only do one?
Yes.
Oh. From what I remember, he did one for exam 3 and exam 4, but that's 2 years ago when I took it. He could change it. That's kind of up to him. Which reminds me, couple people on my midterm eval asked me if I would make practice tests for you guys. I don't know if you guys remember last semester I tried to and got shot down. So I am not allowed to make practice tests. I'm allowed to make practice questions here in session, but I can't put together a practice test and put one out there. I think it's just because the professors would rather do it themselves because they're the ones writing the test. And so obviously their practice tests are a lot more indicative of test material. So it makes sense. So stop asking. No. I only had a couple of people who were like, it'd be nice if you made practice tests. And I was like, it would be nice. It would be really nice. Not for me, but for you. I don't want to do it. But I can't. So it's not even that I'm just like, I can't. I don't want to. I can't. They've asked me not to. So I got too powerful. They were like, he wants it too much. He's going to be too good. So other examples, horses used to have a gene for more than one finger, right? Because a horse leg is just, at the very end, is just a finger, one big finger. Sometimes horses will have side toes. I've actually even seen pictures of cows with the same thing. And it's just like a weird side, I don't really know how, it almost looks like a claw. It's weird. Dolphins and whales with external limbs, and then chick having teeth, and that's what we'll look at Oh, this was the baby with the tail. So birds don't have teeth, right? Which it's actually funny that we talked about this on class on Friday, and then on Saturday, I saw like a tweet or something, and somebody was like, I can't believe it, I just learned that ducks have teeth. This is crazy, how did I not know ducks have teeth? And I was like, I swear on Friday we talked in class that birds don't have teeth. So I Googled it, ducks don't have teeth. Somebody on Twitter is just an idiot, or just trying to get attention. They'll have like little ridges, right? If you've ever been bit by like a chicken or a duck or something, they have little ridges in their beak, but they're not teeth. They're just small protrusions of the beak itself. They're just, it's not like they chew with them or anything. They usually use them for like fighting or defense. But they used to have a gene to grow teeth, right? And this is kind of another way that we bridge the gap between birds and dinosaurs. Dinosaurs used to have teeth. And birds, when they were kind of transitioning, had teeth. And they can do this. So they take mouse mesenchyme, I don't know what that is, and they put chick skin cells, basically, mix it with this mouse mesenchyme, which contains genes to grow teeth, right? Because mice have teeth. And so birds haven't had teeth for over 60 million years, including ducks, right? They can get chickens to grow teeth. I don't know what it looks like. I couldn't find any pictures, but I bet it's weird as crap. And they can get them to grow teeth. And it's again an example of an atavism. It's kind of a forced, derived, contrived atavism. But this gene is just waiting there. It's the mouse mesenchyme just happens to wake it up, right? And now chickens grow teeth. Kind of wild. I'd love to see it, because it'd be weird. Yeah, questions? So, another example of an atavism. So you may see a question that said, like, if, and he'll change it so that it's not straight out of his slides, but if chick epithelial cells were mixed with mouse mesenchyme and activated the gene for teeth, this would be considered an atavism, right? Because it woke up, if you want to think of it that way, an ancestral gene for teeth. It's not that they mutated a mouse chicken and made mouse chickens with teeth, right? They just used some enzymes or proteins or something in mouse genes to turn on chicken genes.
Do you think you'd do like a true or false question with this maybe, and like change mesenchyme to something else?
That seems a little specific to me, especially for him to just change mesenchyme to like, I don't even know what else. That's probably too specific, but he could do a true-false question that it would give you an example of something like this. Some scientists mixed this with that, and they got this result. This is an atavism, true or false. And then you would have to deduce, did they crossbreed something and get a mutation out of it? Did they change its genome? Or did they just use a few chemicals and interactions and things like that to turn on an old gene? So yeah, you could see a true or false, probably just not that specific. It'd be a bit of a douchey move, but it depends on how Dr. Messina's feeling right before he makes the test, right? Other questions? We've got like 10 minutes left, so we're going to breeze through human evolution. Starts with primates, right? So first off, important things to know about primates. They have stereoscopic color vision. They have two eyes facing forward, and they can see trichromatic, right? The three primary colors. And they have bony orbits around their eyes, which is essentially the eyebrows and this like under your eye that you can feel it if you go like this, right? Unless you have a sinus infection, don't go like this, it hurts a lot. Again, a large brain to body size ratio. They mostly are arboreal or tree dwelling and tropical, right? So this is just kind of an interesting comparison. An agouti has an 18-gram brain with 857 million neurons. An owl monkey has a slightly smaller brain at 16 grams, but has almost twice as many neurons, right? So their brain isn't per se larger, but it's denser and it's more complex, right?
Is that because of the folds? Because in the activity it doesn't, it's
Yes, the folding in the brain is what allows, it increases surface area without necessarily increasing volume or mass. So the human brain isn't even the biggest brain out there, right? Whales have larger brains than we do. A lot of animals have bigger brains. Brain size doesn't equal intelligence, right? So don't get that confused. When we say large brain to body size ratio, we're not saying they have really big brains, right? An owl monkey has a smaller brain, but their brain to body size ratio, they have a much larger brain for how big their body is. But again, that's not what makes them smarter. It's the neurons that they have and the folding that they have, right? So they weighed Einstein's brain after he died, and it was actually a couple grams below average, his weight of his brain, because it doesn't matter how heavy, how big your brain is. But they saw an abnormal amount of folding in his brain, so it had a higher surface area, right? So he cheated. He's not actually like better than anyone. He just had a foldy brain, a crinkly brain, right? And again, you can just see that 76-gram brain, 52-gram brain, but twice as many neurons, right? Over twice as many neurons, right? So this is part of what makes primates some of the more intelligent species on the planet. How they adapted to become arboreal was partly that they can turn their arms at their elbows, just like we can, right? We're technically primates. And they have free rotation at the shoulder, meaning they can do these kinds of motions, right? It's very handy when you're swinging through trees to be able to turn your arm and to be able to swing your shoulder, right? The opposable thumb, quite an advancement for humans, right? Comes in handy. They usually don't have claws, right? Because they're not climbers in the sense of digging their claws into things, and they're not fighters in the sense of using their claws. So they usually use them more just for grip. They have very sensitive fingers, quite handy for when you're going from vine to vine. You want to be able to feel them, right? So they have very, very sensitive fingers. We have very, very sensitive fingers. And something that makes them able to have very complex social lives is facial musculature, right? We have very complex musculature in our faces compared to most other animals, right? So this is why chimpanzees and orangs and all those, and us, we can have really complex social lives and structures. We're able to physically display more emotion, therefore we can interact more fully, right? It really just boiled down to we have more muscles in our face, we can express more emotions, right? I should have put it in here. I have a video of a magician doing a card trick. I think it was with a chimpanzee. And he just makes a card disappear, like kind of standard magic. And you see the monkey like raise his eyebrows and his eyes get big and his jaw drops and he goes, and he like puts his hand on the glass and he's trying to figure out where it is, right? Primates can display emotion in a way that most animals can't, right? You probably think that your dog's all cute and he can smile and he can look at you. That's about it, right? Your dog can't laugh. Your dog can't look surprised. Sometimes they can. But they don't make as many facial expressions as us, right? They don't have that same musculature. Okay, I'm going to pick up the pace here because we got to get through it. So primate classes break down into two names. Strepsirrhines, which means wet nose. So these are things like lorises, galagos, lemurs. I don't know what those first two are. I just know how to say them. And then everybody knows what lemurs are, right? Everybody watched Zaboomafoo, and you guys watch Zaboomafoo, right? A few of you know what I'm talking about. What's the other one I'm thinking of? Madagascar. Lemurs, right? Then you have the haplorhines, means dry nose, right? And it's literally because their nose isn't wet, like the strepsirrhines. So you have your tarsiforms, which are tarsiers. They got real creative on that one. Not really anything important to talk about there, tarsiers or tarsiforms. That's it. But then the other breakdown inside of the haplorhines, still inside haplorhines, right? Simiforms or anthropoids. Then you have inside the anthropoids, platyrrhines and catarrhines. These are New World monkeys, right? So the ones you would find in the New World, as in like South America. And then you have Old World monkeys or cercopithecoids inside the catarrhines, and also inside the catarrhines, hominoids or apes, including humans. You do have to know all of these names. You do have to know the order, so you have to know it's strepsirrhines and haplorhines, but then haplorhines breaks into tarsiforms and anthropoids breaks into platyrrhines and catarrhines, and then catarrhines into cercopithecoids and hominoids. You do have to know that. I would also know that strepsirrhine is wet-nosed, haplorhines dry-nosed. I would know platyrrhines are New World, and cercopithecoids inside the catarrhines are Old World. Tarsiers wouldn't be that hard to remember. And then maybe just know anthropoids and simiforms are the same thing. Yeah.
So what does it just mean by old world monkeys?
Africa. So chimpanzees, orangs, gorillas, and any kind of monkey that you would find in Africa. Not monkey, ape, that you would find in Africa. But again, and I guess I guess I said it a little bit wrong. Old World monkeys means African monkeys, and then separately is apes. So chimpanzees and gorillas and all that are hominoids. Cercopithecoids are like baboons, and that big proboscis monkey that had like the huge nose, if you guys remember that from class. But we'll look at that. We'll get into each of these. So this is how they break down, right? Strepsirrhines broke off and are their own species. Then sharing ancestry, you have the tarsiers that break off, then the platyrrhines, then the cercopithecoids, all the way up to the hominoids. And then you can see how each one falls under a category. You do have to know, like strepsirrhines are separate from haplorhines. Tarsiers are not part of the anthropoids. Platyrrhines aren't part of catarrhines, right? So essentially you have to know the name of each and how they branch from each other. So I would spend a lot of time with this. I think I got a question. I think I remember a question about whether platyrrhines or cercopithecoids were New World monkeys. And I think I also got a question on something about strepsirrhines versus haplorhines. I'm not saying that's what you're going to see. I'm just trying to tell you there were at least, as far as I remember, at least 2 questions essentially just off this slide, right? So this is important stuff to know. It's not hard. You do have to take the time to memorize it, right? So again, this is something that I would start drawing it, I would start writing it out, I would start making charts or graphs, or even just make your own phylogenetic tree, but do it over and over and over so when test time comes, you're not going, how did it, you remember, you can maybe even draw it yourself, right? So the anthropoids, so remember, the anthropoids is all of these. You have first the platyrrhines, right? So we'll look at platyrrhines first, is the New World monkeys, right? So the capuchin, I don't know what this is, but then it made me think of an Ewok. I don't even know why. I was like, this kind of looks like an Ewok. Ewoks are not New World monkeys. They're fictional creatures from Star Wars. So New World monkeys, anything you would find in South America, right? Or Central America, or Mexico, or the Bronx Zoo. Yeah, that's all we need for those. Catarrhines have the Old World monkeys and apes, right? So cercopithecoids and hominoids. They don't have a prehensile tail. What does prehensile mean? They can use it like a hand, yeah. So New World monkeys can use their tail almost like a fifth limb, right? I held hands with a spider monkey once, and they have like really weird long fingers, but then he like wrapped his tail around my wrist and it felt like he was grabbing me. They have muscles in it that allow them to physically grab things. I think, in fact, they'll grab onto trees and vines and whatever with their tail, right? So that's a prehensile tail. Platyrrhines don't have that, okay? They have 2 premolars rather than 3. Platyrrhines will have 3 premolars, which comes to this dental formula. This is 2 incisors, right? And we have the same, so if you have a hard time remembering but you know your own teeth well enough, you have 2 incisors, right? Your front teeth and the teeth right next to them. So really 4, but you split it in half and you just look at one side. So you have your 2 incisors, right? Front teeth and the teeth next to it. You have 1 canine, 2 premolars. You can even kind of feel them with your tongue. They're the pointy ones before your molars. And then you have 3 molars, right? But the Platyrrhines have a 2, 1, 3, 3, I think. You won't be tested on that. You could be tested on that, though. 2, 1, 2, 3.
Is wisdom teeth counting as the third?
I don't know. I'm trying to feel it with my tongue. Probably. Yeah, I would say yes. Yeah. I don't know. Try and feel. I'm like, I don't have wisdom teeth anymore, but I'm pretty sure. I'm like running my tongue. I don't know. So, Catarrhines have trichromatic color vision, right? They can see the 3 primary colors and the mix therein. And that just helps them find food better, right? Make sense? So I would know they don't have a prehensile tail. They have the 2 rather than the 3 premolars for a 2, 1, 2, 3 dental formula. Again, that's just starting in the middle of the mouth and going this way. They have the nasal septum very narrow, and they have trichromatic color vision. So old world monkeys would be the Cercopithecus like a baboon. Notice he has a tail, right? It's just not prehensile. It doesn't grip. It doesn't have the muscles in it. Baboons don't use their tails like to grab onto trees and things. They just use them for balance, right? Then you get into the hominoids. So they have arm swinging. They're more erect, right? So apes, you know, they can sit up, right? Does anybody know who this is? That's Harambe. Yep. I Googled gorilla, and he was the first picture that came up. And I was like, oh, it's Harambe. I remember him. He was big in like 2010 or whatever that happened. So their arms and shoulders are more flexible. Again, this is just because of the way that their skeleton is set up. They have a stiffer, straighter spine. Their scapula are more dorsal, right? Which just means that their arms can stick out more sideways, right? Apes can bend their arms back like this. Other monkeys can't. They have a bigger pelvis, right? Part of which allows them to stand on 2 legs, and they don't have a tail at all, right? So think of like chimpanzees and gorillas or humans, no tail. This is the list that I would use to make my chart. So I would have name, approximate date, if there's a location associated with them, if there's a famous example like Lucy, we'll see a couple others, and if they used any kind of tools and what kind of tools, right? And that's essentially the information I would put into that chart, and I would have it all on one page. So we'll get into this. We got into this in class, but we'll get into this and the rest of them on Wednesday. A lot of it's not like the most important thing ever. Like you probably don't need to know that he was a good tree climber, but you will need to know like dates and things like that. And we'll keep talking about that. So.